Ma'am, with all due respect, don't you think your son might be embarrassed if you showed up looking like that? The words, dripping with condescension, hung in the air. Sergeant First Class Miller, a self-proclaimed guardian of military standards at Fort Bragg, had just delivered this verbal jab to a woman who had traveled hours to see her son. He had no idea who he was talking to. Inside a Stark office at the Pentagon, Brigadier General Eleanor Vance meticulously reviewed logistics reports for Operation Ironclad Resolve, a joint exercise with NATO forces in EUCOM. The fluorescent lights hummed, a counterpoint to the anxiety twisting in her gut. Her son, Private First Class Daniel Vance, was stationed at Fort Bragg. Duty had kept her away for far too long. Glancing at a worn photograph of Daniel taped to her monitor, she made a decision. She would visit him this weekend, not as a brigadier general but as a mother. She pictured his face lighting up when he saw her, a brief escape from the rigors of basic training. Determined to avoid any undue attention or special treatment, Eleanor packed a simple sweater and jeans. She wanted to be just another visiting parent, not a distraction or an embarrassment. "Danny will be happy I'm there no matter what I'm wearing," she muttered to herself, grabbing a bag of homemade cookies, his favorite. Meanwhile, Daniel was counting down the hours until his mother's visit. He missed her terribly. He had bragged to his fellow recruits about his mom, about how strong and supportive she was, without ever mentioning her rank. To him, she was simply Mom. The weekend arrived, crisp and clear. Eleanor drove to Fort Bragg, a knot of anticipation tightening in her stomach. After navigating the security checkpoint, she was directed to the visitors' center. She sat, trying to calm her nerves, picturing Daniel bursting through the door. Instead, Sergeant First Class Miller strode in, his chest puffed out, his eyes scanning Eleanor's attire with undisguised disapproval. "Ma'am," he began, his voice laced with disdain, "are you aware this is a military installation? There's a standard of dress expected. Showing up looking like that sets a poor example." Eleanor was taken aback. Decades of service hadn't prepared her for this blatant disrespect, especially directed at a visiting parent. She bit back a sharp retort. "I apologize, Sergeant. I didn't realize there was a specific dress code for visitors." Miller, emboldened by her apparent meekness, continued his tirade. "This isn't a civilian playground, ma'am. This is the United States Army. Your lack of decorum reflects poorly on the recruits. What kind of message are you sending to these soldiers?" He gestured dismissively at the bag of cookies. "And what's all that? You moving in? The PX has everything they need. We don't need you bringing in outside distractions." Each word felt like a slap. Eleanor's carefully constructed facade of composure began to crumble. The cookies, baked with love and longing, were now distractions. Humiliation burned in her throat. Just then, the door swung open, and Daniel rushed in, his face beaming. "Mom!" He stopped short, his smile faltering as he took in the scene. Miller snapped to attention. "Private Vance, do you not know military bearing? Explain to your mother the proper way to conduct herself on a military base. She seems to think this is a social gathering." He glared at Eleanor. "She's only making things harder on you." Daniel's face flushed with embarrassment. "Sergeant Miller, my mum," he began, but Miller cut him off. "Enough! Your mother thinks she can waltz in here and do whatever she pleases. She doesn't understand the consequences." He shot Eleanor a condescending look. Eleanor had had enough. "Sergeant," she said, her voice regaining its steely edge, "I think it's best if I cut my visit short. Danny, I'll see you another time." She forced a smile, but her eyes betrayed the hurt she felt. Daniel looked devastated. He stood frozen, torn between his mother and his superior. Miller watched Eleanor leave, a smirk playing on his lips. "Make sure she understands the rules next time, Vance. Wouldn't want her to cause any more problems for you." As Eleanor walked away, her steps heavy with disappointment, tears welled in her eyes. She had dedicated her life to the military, but this experience had left her feeling defeated and humiliated. Reaching her car, she sat for a long moment, struggling to regain her composure. How could she leave Daniel in this environment? Finally, she pulled out her phone. She dialed a familiar number. Lieutenant General Sarah Jenkins, her mentor and a high-ranking officer in the Pentagon. Eleanor hesitated. Was she overreacting? Would this call jeopardize Daniel's career? But she couldn't ignore the injustice she had witnessed. "Sarah, it's Eleanor," she said, her voice trembling. Jenkins' voice was warm and concerned. "Eleanor, what's wrong? You sound upset." Eleanor recounted the events at Fort Bragg, the demeaning words, the blatant disrespect. As she spoke, Jenkins' voice grew colder and more resolute. That's unacceptable, Eleanor. Absolutely unacceptable. What unit is this sergeant in? I'll personally see to it that this is addressed. Eleanor took a deep breath. Sarah, I'm not asking for immediate retribution. While his behavior was appalling, I believe this is symptomatic of a larger problem. It's not just about one sergeant. It's about a culture of disrespect that needs to be addressed. Jenkins paused, considering. You're right, Eleanor. We need to look at the bigger picture. But this cannot be ignored. I'm ordering an immediate Inspector General investigation into the climate at Fort Bragg, with a focus on command climate and treatment of junior enlisted and their families. That unit will be under intense scrutiny. And Eleanor, don't blame yourself. You did nothing wrong. Jenkins' words offered a measure of comfort. Thank you, Sarah. I appreciate that. Hanging up, Eleanor stared out the window, a mixture of anger and resolve churning within her. She had set something in motion, something bigger than herself. She started the car and headed back to Washington, D.C. The next morning, Fort Bragg was in an uproar. An unannounced Inspector General, IG, team had descended upon the base, launching a comprehensive investigation. The sudden arrival of the IG sent shockwaves through the ranks. Whispers spread like wildfire. What's going on? Who did something wrong? Sergeant First Class Miller was particularly unnerved. He had spent the previous evening bragging to his buddies about putting some uppity civilian in her place. Now the very foundation of his self-assuredness was crumbling. Could it be about yesterday? Nah, just some woman in a sweater. She wouldn't have any pull. But a cold sweat broke out on his forehead. Later that morning, Miller was summoned to headquarters. A knot of officers stood nervously outside the conference room, which had been converted into an IG interview space. Swallowing hard, Miller waited his turn. Finally, he was called in. Two stern-faced inspectors sat at a table, reviewing printouts from the visitors' center security cameras and a thick file of documents. Miller's stomach dropped. Sergeant First Class Miller, were you on duty at the visitors' center yesterday afternoon? One of the inspectors asked, his voice devoid of emotion. Yes, sir. Miller tried to sound confident, but his voice wavered. Did you engage in disrespectful or demeaning behavior towards a visitor? Absolutely not, sir. I was simply upholding standards. Miller started to protest, but the other inspector clicked a button on a laptop. The security camera footage filled the screen. Miller's words, his condescending tone, his dismissive gestures were all captured in crystal-clear detail. The inspector paused the video, highlighting the moment Miller pointed at the bag of cookies and sneered. Is that you in the video, Sergeant? Miller paled. He was trapped. The inspector picked up a document from the table and handed it to Miller. It was a copy of Eleanor Vance's official military record. The rank field was stark and undeniable. Brigadier General. The visitor you disrespected yesterday, Sergeant, was Brigadier General Eleanor Vance. Did you know who she was when you spoke to her? Or did you simply assume you could belittle anyone who didn't meet your standards? Brigadier General. Miller's mind reeled. The humble, unassuming woman who had visited her son was a general, a one-star general. The realization hit him like a physical blow. His legs buckled and he collapsed into a chair. The interrogation continued. The IG team had gathered statements from other soldiers, painting a picture of Miller's habitual abuse of power. He routinely berated junior enlisted personnel, assigned them demeaning tasks, and created a toxic environment of fear and intimidation. Several soldiers, emboldened by the IG investigation, came forward with their own stories of Miller's mistreatment of their families. Miller had no defense. Meanwhile, in a separate office, Brigadier General Vance was receiving real-time updates on the IG investigation. She maintained a calm facade, but each new revelation of Miller's misconduct deepened her disappointment. She wasn't seeking revenge. She wanted systemic change. The commander of Fort Bragg, a colonel named Martinez, approached Eleanor, his face etched with anxiety. General Vance, I offer my sincerest apologies for the unacceptable behavior of Sergeant First Class Miller. His actions are a disgrace to the uniform. He will be held fully accountable. We will learn from this and ensure that all personnel are treated with dignity and respect. Eleanor listened intently, her expression unreadable. I appreciate your commitment, Colonel Martinez, but this is not just about one sergeant. It's about fostering a culture of respect throughout the entire command. We need to ensure that every soldier feels valued and supported. Moments later, Miller was escorted into the office, his face ashen. The arrogance that had defined him just days before was gone, replaced by a look of abject fear. He dropped to his knees before Eleanor. "General Vance, I am so sorry. I made a terrible mistake. I didn't know who you were. Please forgive me." Eleanor remained standing, her voice firm and unwavering. "Sergeant First Class Miller, the person you disrespected yesterday was more than just a mother visiting her son. You violated the trust placed in you as a leader. You undermined the very values we are sworn to uphold. Do you understand the gravity of your actions?" Miller sobbed, his face buried in his hands. Eleanor sighed. "I am not here to accept your personal apology. Your actions will be judged according to military law, but I hope for your own sake that you learn from this experience and dedicate yourself to earning back the respect you have lost." She turned and walked away, leaving Miller kneeling on the floor, his career in ruins. Miller was stripped of his rank, demoted to private and reassigned to hard labor. Details of his misconduct and punishment were disseminated throughout the base, serving as a stark warning to others. Daniel, witnessing the fallout, felt a surge of respect and gratitude for his mother. He vowed to emulate her integrity and strength. Brigadier General Vance's actions triggered a widespread review of command climate across the Army. The Department of Defense implemented new training programs focused on leadership ethics, respect, and inclusivity. Emphasis was placed on creating a safe and supportive environment for soldiers and their families. The unit at Fort Bragg experienced a dramatic transformation. The atmosphere became more positive, more collaborative. Officers were more attentive to the needs of their soldiers, and instances of abuse and harassment decreased significantly. Daniel thrived in the new environment, excelling in his training and forging strong bonds with his fellow soldiers. He often heard his comrades say, "Your mum saved this unit." Brigadier General Vance became a champion for military families. She spoke at conferences, testified before Congress, and advocated for policies that supported the well-being of soldiers and their loved ones. She became a symbol of hope and change. As Daniel's tour of duty drew to a close, Eleanor returned to Fort Bragg for his farewell ceremony. This time she wore her uniform, her Brigadier General star gleaming in the sunlight. She was greeted with respect and admiration by everyone she encountered. At the ceremony, Daniel stood tall and proud, his eyes shining with gratitude. He saluted his mother, a silent acknowledgement of the sacrifices she had made and the impact she had had on his life. After the ceremony, they embraced. A mother and son reunited, their bond stronger than ever. "I'm so proud of you, Danny," Eleanor said, her voice choked with emotion. "You've become a fine soldier." "I learned from the best, Mum," Daniel replied, squeezing her hand. As they walked away, hand in hand, Eleanor knew that she had made a difference, not just for her son, but for countless other soldiers and families across the Army. Her act of courage had sparked a transformation, a renewed commitment to the values of honor, respect, and selfless service.